enjoy all that you have manifest. In the challenging moments, lean on the God of your understanding and take comfort in the human resilience of our community. In your growth, simultaneously begin to build up others. Share your knowledge, share your platform with those that share your passion, and don't be afraid of their potential. Your story, most importantly, is vital to our community. Share it with conviction and a boldness in the form of your art and produce for the benefit and nourishment of your fellow man. Thank you for allowing my stories to take shelter with you, for your heart's compassion, for your mind's understanding. If you take anything else away from reading this book, please know that you are sacred, and by default, you are a safe space. You are the safe space you wish to create in the world, so live and lead in that greatness. Thank
you. Oh, wait, I forgot to do that. Julio, I see, there you are. Oh my goodness. Hi, Julio. Listen, but you are sacred, and by virtue, you are, listen, that was a whole preach word. That just did something to my spirit. By default, you are a safe space because you're sacred. Oh my gosh. Welcome to Inspire, Julio. Thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
I am doing fantastic, Sue. Thank you so much for the space, for that introduction. You really went in. So I definitely appreciate the space that you created there. And thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with your guests. And I feel privileged and honored that I'm opening up the third season. I didn't know that. So
yeah. Listen. And I'm glad that you are. And so, I have to ask you, what are you sipping on as I take a sip of my tea? What you got? What you sipping on this morning?
I'm sipping on a hot cup of Bustelo coffee, caffeinated Bustelo.
Come on. Listen, do they have decaf Bustelo?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
It's actually in my Disney Pride cup. So I thought
Come on, Disney Pride.
Let's put that out there.
I love it. And that Bustelo too. And I know my sister Allie is a Bustelo girl.
Yes.
The stronger the better. The stronger the better. But see, my heartburn can't take it. That's and so for those of you who wonder why I moved to decaf, is because Sue's heartburn can't take it. So but I make the decaf strong, so it tricks my brain into thinking that.
But you got it going, yeah.
And so it does what it needs to do. It does. So she said, "Come on, Bustelo." Oh, your mom is on. Your mom is on, Julio.
Love you.
Oh my goodness. She's like, "I'm so proud of you, who you've become." Love, Mom.
Always always.
Oh my God, it's so wonderful when our family, right, supports us, particularly our moms, right. My first Inspire show, like, Mom was on, and she's been on plenty of times since then, but it's just your friends could support you, and but it's something different about when your mama is on.
Absolutely. My mom is at everything that I do. I don't need to invite because she knows already that's the space for her. So it's always great to look over my shoulder and see that my mom is there. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for being for supporting Julio and being such an example, right? Really an example for what it looks like to embrace your child, right? To embrace your LGBTQ plus, right, child. And we know that is not the story for everyone. That's not the story for everyone. So we so appreciate that you are an example. Evelyn Torres says, Julio is a very great person. I met him almost 2 years ago along with his partner, Ralph, and they are just amazing people.
Oh.
Listen, the people are watching. They're here to support you, Julio.
I love it. What a way to start out a Saturday morning.
Yeah. Even though it's a little early for some, depending on if you went out Friday last night.
That's true.
but nevertheless, I'm glad that all of you and Julio is here. So I read some of your bio first before we get into some of the back end. Julio, tell us more about the work that you do as an advocate and activist, particularly as the CEO of the Out Agency.
Awesome. Well, I actually do a lot of work across the country. I am with the Latino Commission on AIDS, and I
Hmm.
also serve as their director for gay, bi, and trans health initiatives. So I have the privilege and honor to work with about 50 LGBT organizations throughout New York City, which is the LGBT network. I organize the LGBT health equity rally that takes place in New York City. And that rally is created really to create a space for Latinx people to be able to come together and really discuss what are the health issues that are affecting the community and the best ways to address those health issues.
Hmm.
Then I'm fortunate enough to organize within the state of New York to bring policymakers together along with other community leaders to bring some of those recommendations that were created in New York City and those voices and then take them up to Albany. I do that as a part of the policy team where we are constantly engaging and recruiting LGBT community members to really own their voice and narrative as they're speaking to policymakers and people of influence that can directly affect the way LGBT people live. When it comes to health, equity, housing, and some of the real life issues that affect LGBT people throughout the country.
Mm.
Flip side of that, as the CEO of the Out Agency, I lead the efforts. Out stands for Organizing Unique Transformations. We started it, me and my partner started it about 2.5 years ago during the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
Everything was shut down. It really allowed us to like do a reset and really look at, the work that we've done within the community, the work we've done as an employee for other organizations and companies, and really looked at how can we create a model of our own that will allow us to really be able to grow our own business. And so with his creativity with content creation and marketing, and then
Mhm.
with my experience in doing program design, grant writing, and capacity building, we put all those skills together and really defined what the Out Agency was within the first 2 years. And that
Mm.
is a social impact organization that is looking to provide capacity building to organizations and companies that are looking to change and impact lives.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing in the community, Julio. Like, we certainly appreciate you, and you are so needed. So thank you for saying yes to the call that's on your life to do this work in the community. So we commend you. We commend you. Um, so thank you for sharing that. So sharing your bio. That I've read, for those of you who got a chance to hear it, we talked a little bit about some of your childhood experiences, right? So can you tell us more about them? And can you tell us, how did this time in your life shape your passion for activism, advocacy, and safe space design? And we're going to ask you what that definition of safe space is in a bit. But how did this time in your life shape who you are, right? What lessons did you learn, and have you applied them to your work over the past 23 years?
So when I think about my experience as a kid growing up, I have to think about the city that I'm from. I'm from Newark, and as you know, Newarkers are really proud
Mhm.
folks of their community. And I was fortunate growing up to live in 3 of the 5 wards of the city. And so I feel like that experience growing up really allowed me to look at communities and the different elements of communities right within close proximity to one another. So growing up, I was born and raised for the first part of my life in the central part of Newark, which was a predominantly Latino community made up of Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and many immigrants from South and Central America.
Mhm.
So early on in my life, growing up in the city, I was already a witness to Latinx pride and Latino pride. You know, we had the flags hanging out the windows every Saturday. All of the granddads and uncles would bring out their crates and their domino tables. The
Mhm.
women would open up their windows to start cooking and bachata and salsa. All of those elements of being Latino was really prominent within the Central Ward. And so I found myself fortunate that growing up, I was able to witness some of that. As a part of living there, you know, we all lived together with my grandmother, was my grandmother, my aunt, three of my uncles, my mom, and
Mhm.
then me and my twin brother. And we was in a three-bedroom place, a three-bedroom apartment. And you know, it came a point where we really needed to kind of move on and move forward. My mom sat us down and really explained that, you know, through a city lottery system, we were chosen for housing. And so that was
Mhm.
really important for me growing up because we went from a really packed environment on the central part of Newark to now being told that we were going to get our own bedroom and our own apartment, which was super exciting. She said lottery system. So right away for me, as a 10-year-old kid, I thought of like the clearinghouse guy on TV. I thought of the balloons, the
Mhm.
big check.
Mhm.
I thought this was going to be like an amazing experience that we were going to go through. And I remember leaving the central part of Newark and moving into our new community. And as we were driving, noticing how that community was changing, noticing
Mhm.
how as we began to drive further away from the central part of Newark to the south part of Newark, those flags were no longer there, right?
Wow.
Bodegas were no longer there. They slowly began to fade away as we began to make our way to the south part of Newark. And it was really at that age that I became aware of space. I
Mhm.
became aware of an uncomfortability that existed when you were being put in a environment that you didn't recognize.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to verbalize it, but I could feel that anxiety building up. And so on the way to the south side of Newark, you know, I saw for the first time the Stella Wright projects from the distance. And I remember looking at those buildings and saying, wow, I wonder, you know, who lives there and what kind of people live there.
Mhm.
Up to this point in the central part of Newark, we were living in three-family homes. We didn't see projects. And it was, I won't say a shocker, but it was an interesting moment where we were driving closer and closer to those projects, and we found ourselves actually getting into the parking lot and realizing that this was going to be our new home and our new space.
Yeah.
Community where no one really looked like me. It was a predominantly African American community. And
Mhm.
so, really early on at that point, it created a certain awareness around space that I became attuned to really early on. And so I really contribute that move as almost being like a light being turned on to where before in the central part of Newark, I wasn't aware of the particular environment I was in into I moved into an environment where no one looked like me.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
So that experience really shaped me in the sense of now I became aware and attuned to my community and my environment.
Wow.
So we spent some time there, and it was also within that environment that I really began to look at my mother as a source of safety even more. And it was really where I began to see compassion and empathy for my mom. Moving to the south part of Newark is where I also, for the first time, encountered what HIV and AIDS looked like.
Mm. Mhm.
It wasn't until I was coming home from school one day and there was a woman sitting in the front of our building. She was in a hospital gown with nothing else on, looked very sickly. She was under 100 pounds. She had open sores
Mhm.
all over
Mm.
the body. And it was disturbing to see, even at 10, 11 years old, coming home from school to see that woman there. But what startled me most about looking and seeing this woman was that she had features that have resembled a Latino person. She was light skinned, and these were features that I had come to know in my aunt and my mom. And so ran upstairs, told my mom about this woman who was in the front of our building. Kids were throwing rocks at her, little young kids.
Mm.
Right away, my mom stopped everything she was doing in the kitchen and ran down those 7 flights of stairs And I followed right behind her. And my mom ran to this woman who she had seemed to know. She had picked her up off of the ground, and she had carried her back into our building with everyone staring at my mother and no one offering any type of assistance or help.
Wow.
And I share a lot of this in my book, but it was that experience that I really began to see the compassion and empathy of my mother,
Hmm.
and really where I began to ask questions about who this woman was, why
Yeah.
was she here, why did she look this way? And it was in that experience where my mom shared that this was actually a family member who had moved away earlier on in my life. Somehow or another, she found her way back. And then she begins to share this story of what HIV is, the best way that she can to a 11-year-old kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Whew.
And so it was those experiences really that when you ask, what shaped the work that I do today, it was the awareness of space, but it was also the compassion and empathy that I saw my mom create for my aunt. And it was that safe space that I saw my mother create when everyone in my family was telling her she has HIV. Don't let her use your utensils. Don't let her stay in your house. She shouldn't be using your restroom. All those stigmas that were associated with HIV then my mother would constantly challenge those thoughts
Yeah.
and make sure, made it known to my aunt that uh, she would be cared for and that she was in a safe space. So my mother had a big influence in putting that within me and my consciousness.
Wow. Whew. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for being such an amazing example of compassion and empathy. And I thank you for sharing the story in the way that you did, Julio, because like I really went with you to that time in your life, and I can see it play out. And I just envisioned, like, I don't know what your mom looks like, but I envisioned her, running down to embrace your aunt. Like the whole thing that's played out so clear in my mind. And so thank you for sharing that story with us. I do want to we'll talk more about the importance of activism and advocacy, but I because where you brought up so eloquently that this importance for safe spaces. I want to jump to talk about safe space for a
Mhm.
little bit. So I want to do two things. I want to talk about safe spaces, and then, of course, I want to talk about your book. So if you're just joining us, I want to remind you that Julio is the author of Out of Space, Creating Safe Spaces in Unlikely Places. And we are giving away a copy of that book today. We're giving away a copy of that book. So please type the hashtag inspire. So it's pound inspire. Don't make sure you don't have any spaces. Don't have any spaces in it. And we will give away a copy of that book today. But so let's touch on the safe space portion. In your bio, you state that you love the process of taking unsafe spaces and turning them on their heads to be examples of safety meccas. I love that terminology, safety meccas in our community. So, can you tell us, how do you define a safe space, and what do you believe are some of the common misconceptions about what a safe space is?
So when I define a safe space, I define it as a space where you can exist authentically and unapologetically as yourself, free of fear and threat of harm.
Mm.
I think of a space as a place where you can exist boldly and freely as who you are. Simply
Yeah.
state and purpose that.
So, my mom is on. Hi, mom. I,
Uh-oh.
I don't know if you saw, mom. We were talking about the importance. We love our friends and our family, but it's something. It hits different. It hits different when
Mhm.
it's your mom. Hey, Reverend Dr. Stacy May, I see you. Thank you for joining us. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your book. Let's talk a little bit about your book. Who is it first? Who is the book for? Right? What was your vision when you were writing it? Why did you write it? And what was your vision when writing it?
You know what, Sue? I realized that I didn't answer your last question. What are some misconceptions about a
Oh
safe
yes, misconceptions. Go ahead. Let's talk about that, and then we can talk about the book.
Yeah, thank you. Because I feel like my book really talks to addressing this biggest misconception. I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest misconceptions when we think of safe spaces is that it has to solely exist within a physical location. You know, I
Mm,
talk about a safe space not just being four walls and a door, but a safe space being us, the physical spaces that we take up in the world. And I think many times when we think of a safe space, and I don't want to take away from the importance of physical locations either. I don't want to take away from the importance of centers and community organizations that are creating those spaces. But I wanted to think a little bit further outside of the box when we think of safe
yeah.
spaces and how do we take the message of safe space? How do we take the message of empathy and love and compassion outside of the building and
Mm-hmm.
begin to spread it out into the environments that we occupy every day?
Yeah.
And so I challenge my readers to think about safe spaces as what values do you represent? That when you walk into a room, if someone who doesn't have a voice or someone who is marginalized, based off of you representing those values, um, representing safety. And I think also that the message that LGBT people have to share, and maybe this is a part of church and me growing up in church and thinking about evangelism is how do you take this message of safe space to affect others? So
Mm-hmm.
that maybe if they never make it to a physical location, they're able to identify people in their lives that can represent that safety.
Yeah.
Um, and I also believe that as LGBT people, we deserve more than just four walls and a door to be safe in. I feel like we
Right.
deserve to feel safe in any environment that we walk in. And, taking that message and promoting it is what my mission really is with the book.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's see. I wasn't aware what HIV was until it also took my mother at the age of 34. That's Evelyn Torres. Thank you for sharing that, Evelyn. Thank you for sharing that part of your life with us.
Mhm.
Okay, so again, I see those entries coming in. You will be able to win a copy of Julio's book. But also, I want you to also support Julio, and so I'm going to drop the link where you can purchase the book. So if you win or not, I want you to be able to support Julio in this work and buy a copy. Buy a copy for yourself, buy a copy for a friend, for a loved one. So that is now posted in that's not posted in the chat. Okay. So you know what? Let's take a break. All right. Let's take a sip of water, a sip of whatever you're sipping on. And listen, I'm so enjoying our conversation, Julio. And we'll be right back in a minute to have some more of this wonderful conversation in a few minutes.
If I fall behind on one more thing today, I'm going to call it quits.
Is your workload leaving you frustrated? Talked about owning all of you, owning all of who you are. And we are continuing. It's so rich. We're continuing this conversation this coming Wednesday. We're going to talk about being the great pretender, right? And how many of us are groomed, right? Whether it's in churches, in society, in our families, right? To be imposters. So we're going to continue that conversation on Wednesday. And I want to make sure that you join me over there. All right. We'll get ready to go back into our conversation with Julio. And yeah, we can welcome Julio back right now to finish our conversation.
One of my biggest mistakes early on was spending way too much of my energy trying to get others to see my vision, support my vision, and recognize the gift that vision could produce. But what I later came to realize, that was never your job. It's on me to bring this to life. So that's what I did. And it's not because you didn't believe, it's simply because I did. And who better than me?
Oh, I love that video. Thank you.
As soon as I saw it, I said, yes, that's the "We Are Back." That has to be the "We Are Back" to transition to the rest of our conversation. So thank you again, Julio, for joining us and for sharing your story, sharing your passion with us about the work that you do in community. talking a little bit about your book, talking about safe spaces and the misconceptions of safe spaces. I love how you put that, right? And the safe space being us, how we are a safe space, not only for ourselves, but for others. And it's not always within the four walls, right? And I think when we think about safe spaces, we often think about a place, right? And I often say that that word safe is relative, because what's the safe space for one is not all necessarily a safe space for another, particularly when it comes to churches, particularly when it comes to the church. And so I love how you broke down like this definition of what a safe space is for us. Can you share an example of a time when you transformed, or were you transformed an unsafe space into a safe one, and what was that process?
Sure. Thank you, Sue. I think about the work that I do with the out agency a lot of times. When we're typically engaged from an organization or company to work with creating a safe space, typically what I need to do with my team is really going into the organization and really taking a look at what their policies, procedures, how their organizational culture is set up, how are their employee resource groups set up, to really take a look and to see if LGBT representation is being included into the process. And what do I mean by that? Many times we use the term representation and inclusion together, but often you can be represented somewhere and not included in that same space, right? You can sit at a table and not be included into the process of what's taking place at that table. And that happens for many, many folks when it comes to business, or even when designing a program that is meant to be a safe space for the community. And so what I do is I look at who's at the table. I look at what voices are, or what hands are involved in designing programming or the space. Are the folks who are involved, or do they have a lived experience of the community that they're trying to create this space for? And how is that reflected into policy? So when I go into, let's say, an LGBT organization or a university that is looking to create, let's say, a LGBT resource group, my job is to look at where are areas that LGBT people may feel unsafe in. What is the language that may make folks feel unsafe? And how do we begin to replace that language with more inclusive language? How do we replace negative policy with policy that's not only inclusive, but also impactful long-term wise, right? Yeah. Creating a safe space isn't just like a feel-good thing to do, but it actually has impact on community when it comes to delivering public health programming. We know that Black and Brown LGBT people will access care if they feel safe going to that environment. We know that you're more likely to see a provider if your provider is knowledgeable of your experience, if you are a trans person. So how do we inform communities and keep them educated is a question that is constantly in my mind when we're looking at designing safe spaces. And sometimes that involves changing out full policies altogether, providing one-on-one mentorship or leadership, providing coaching. So I like to call it a trifecta approach sometimes, but sometimes it's even larger than that. Sometimes you have to look at it from the ground level all the way up to leadership level of spaces.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So now let's touch on a little bit about the importance of activism and advocacy work. Why is this work important, particularly in the LGBTQ plus community, and specifically for Black and Brown LGBTQIA plus individuals?
When I think of activism and my experience with activism, it has always been very reactionary. So when I think of activism, I think of accountability. I think when we get to the point of activism, it's already a place where we need to hold folks accountable. We also need to bring things to the light. And I think that as Black and Brown LGBT people, we have to be able to do that without a fear and with a certain level of boldness that really allows us to bring light to the issues that we are facing. But most importantly, it's also about making sure that our voices are heard. whether it's media, whether it's public health, activism and advocacy has always been a way that Black and brown people have been able to tell their story and put their stories to the forefront. Also, in my line of work, it's important as Black and brown people, especially in terms of health, that we are accurately represented when it comes to policy, that our stories and our narratives are actively showing up when we are talking about how we work with communities. And many times that means that we have to blow the whistle on things that may not be right or that may not be serving of our community. And then it also means that we also have to advocate for the solutions that are working. And so when I think of both of those two things, I think of it as a call and response approach. In activism, we're calling for our community, but in advocacy, we have to be ready to provide solutions and say, this is not just a problem, but these are some of the solutions that can begin to help us bridge or close that gap when it comes to representation and safe spaces.
Mm-hmm. So what? So I'm going to get into just some how you take care of yourself, but what advice would you have for individuals who are just starting to engage in the work of activism and advocacy, and what skills do you think are essential for being successful in this particular field?
I would say become as knowledgeable as you can about whatever cause that you're really fighting for. I would say know it like the back of your hand. And when I say that, I mean, know the historical context of the work that you're getting into, know who the players were, know what the narrative was before you came on the scene, and also educate yourself on what's currently taking place. Many times, and I've encountered it with folks who are really passionate about the work that they do, but when they get in the room and they need to sometimes defend that passion, it can be a more difficult process to do, right? Because we're not as informed. So I think being as informed is really important. I will also say, look into the community and seek out those that you admire that are already doing the work. Look at folks that are actively doing it. Reach out to them. In a world of social media, it has never been easier. Look at their work. Look at the circles that they're involved in and the causes that they're involved in and the organizations. And look to mimic some of those experiences and reach out to some of these leaders. And I always say, ask for mentorship. But when you reach out, be very specific about what it is that mentorship looks like to you. Many times, a lot of community organizations and leaders are really busy. They would love to do mentoring, but sometimes I feel like we haven't really figured out the acts when it comes to leaders and mentoring. And so, for an example, I have a mentor in New York City who does public health work in government. And in reaching out to him, I had a clear ask. Can I engage you for 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes once a month to answer 2 or 3 questions by phone or Zoom? And so I asked for help, but I also created context in that help. And so I think linking up with folks who have been actively doing the work is incredibly important for historical lens, right? You want to know what's happened before, but also so that they can bring you into rooms that you possibly couldn't access on your own.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to remind you, we're all giving away a copy of Julio's book. So let's do the hashtag. Let me just put it up. Hashtag inspire, right? Do the hashtag pound inspire. All no spaces. I see some of you have put your entries in already, and so we invite you to do that because we're getting ready to do our book giveaway very shortly. And if you have a question for Julio, I want to make sure that that you get it responded to. So you can go ahead and post it in the chat real quick as we begin to wrap up. So Julio, you wear so many hats, right? Right? You wear so many hats. And so this is going to be I guess a double question. So, one, how do you balance your roles as CEO, director, speaker, author? Like, how do you balance all of your identities, right? Um, and what motivates you to keep going? And also, how do you manage your mental and your emotional well-being while working in a challenging and I'm sure often emotionally draining field? So how do you balance your roles? What motivates you to keep going? So that's actually three questions. And
Yeah.
how do you manage your mental and emotional well-being?
What motivates me, and then how I balance well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, cool, cool. I think in balancing my roles, before I take on any new responsibilities, I've learned when I was younger, I would take on more than I could bear, or not bear, but I would just take on more than I think I was able to dedicate myself to. So now, as a way of balancing the work that I do, I always question whether any new work I'm taking on complements the work that I'm already doing. If it's not complementing the work that I'm already doing, chances are that it's probably not within my mission. And so I now kindly decline different types of opportunities or different types of initiatives that may not line up with the work. I'm fortunate where I do, I'm an LGBT activist, but I also am the director of Gay, Bi, and Trans Men. So there's some intersections that exist within that type of work. And then with out, I work with the LGBT communities around the same thing: HIV, capacity building, and public health. So in order for me to balance it, I knew that there would have to be some intersectionalities
Mm-hmm.
that existed. And within that, I found that opportunities have been created across the board. And I've been able to cross and bring opportunities from different hats that I'm wearing to
Yes.
possibly enhance another part of the work.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have teams in respect to all the work that I do. So I have an out team who's incredible at facilitating my vision and the management, right? You can have a great vision, but we know there's a lot of management that's great.
Yes.
So having the right teams in both out and my teams with the Latino Commission has been vital at my success of being able to balance those roles.
Wonderful, wonderful. And your emotional well-being. We need to hear that too.
My emotional well-being, I'm going on a 3-week vacation. I'm going to say that after about maybe 2 years. And what I'm going to say is that once a month, me and my partner, we practice weekends where we cut off all technology and it's just me and him. We
Mhm.
travel a lot. About once a month, we try to carve out that space. And also I try to, when I'm done with work on, let's say, a Thursday evening or Friday, I try to look at how can I spend time with my family, and how can I re-energize. Family
Yeah.
is super important to me, especially as I'm getting older. I'm learning to slow down and create those memories, uh,
Mhm.
but also making sure that I'm creating those boundaries for that time.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So what is the future? All right. What does the future look like for you?